refuge, can we?
We go for refuge to all the Buddhas, so that all sentient beings may realize Buddhahood. We go for refuge to all Buddhas, so that all sentient beings may realize Buddhahood. We go for refuge to all Buddhas, so that all sentient beings may realize Buddhahood.
So, we're very honoured to have these two very experienced lamas.
Okay.
Lama colleagues of the same lineage, and yes, I don't know how many of you actually got to look at the little blurbs about each of them, but it's really quite amazing their qualifications and what they've been doing, and it's been really interesting the last few days finding out more and more about how experienced they are in training programs, developing training programs, training mentors for training programs, and you've got so much that we can learn, and they're very generously offering their help. So we've been this morning Patty was talking to them about what they can do to help us, and we went and saw Dashu and talked to him a bit to make that connection. So I think we're hopefully going to see a lot more of both of you. But, so Karl was he came into the Dharma in the 83, yeah, gosh, and trained with Khenpo Rinpoche to be in philosophy and Tibetan, and trained at Hamburg University in was it Buddhist studies? Yeah, Buddhology and Sanskrit for a few years as well. And of course we all know him from his voluminous texts of translated material, including the Heart Attack Sutra, which is Namjal's favourite. But and he gives talks as well at Tek Chok Ling when we meet up, the MAPA network meet up, and then he's been working with Ponlop Rinpoche for many years, and had been one of the first main Western teachers that Ponlop Rinpoche appointed, and has been in charge of all their activities, and really been the backbone of the whole training program, along with your colleagues, I suppose. But
Not just me.
Yeah, they call
Stephanie
them,
too.
No. Yeah, no,
Yes.
obviously, yes. I mean, they're coming to her, yeah.
I ask her
Mitra colleagues.
usually.
Mitra.
Mitra colleagues.
So you're also Mitra?
No.
No, I see, right. So
No.
you're Mitra colleagues, and then other colleagues which weren't called Mitras, but every Sangha has its own names for all the different, levels of mentors and teachers and so on. So, they're very experienced, and actually, I think Ponlop Rinpoche was starting off his Nalanda Bodhi program about the same time as we were starting off as the Awakened Heart Sangha, I think. More or less.
Is it 20 years?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Around?
no, I remember he
Yes.
came to Tinagos, and I was trying to get him interested in DHB, and he was trying to get me interested in what he was doing. And neither of us had time to look at each other to see what we were doing. But it's been very interesting seeing how, in many ways, how it's been quite parallel. Although I've been using the kind of language that Rigzi Chikpo brought in with the DHB, and then exploring that more. And they've been more working with Ponlop Rinpoche and the way he wanted to take it, and I've been doing my own thing. So that's quite an interesting dynamic. So, well, I think that's enough. And then Steph, I haven't been so aware of what she'd been doing. She became Buddhist in '85, and she through Vajradhatu first. That was, Trungpa Sangha. You didn't actually meet Trungpa, did you?
You did.
Oh, you did?
I was lucky. Yes, very lucky.
Oh, yes, you would have done, wouldn't
Right,
you?
right, just at the end.
Yeah, no, that's just
And-
going to ask you that.
I was really blown away by him.
Yeah.
I knew nothing about Buddhism, but what really struck me was how genuinely happy he was, and how completely embarrassed everybody was around him at the occasion that I went to, where I saw him.
Interesting.
Yeah, he was so happy. I thought, wow, this person's not faking it. He's really genuinely really happy. And it's affecting everybody here in a very strong way. So that was kind of cool.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
So then she studied she followed the programs in the Nalanda Bodhi and the Nitata Institute. That's all part of Ponte Rinpoche's thing. But she also did all the Ngeden studies as well in
Vajradhatu, yeah.
Yeah, so she's got a lot behind her. And yeah, interestingly, she's educated in museum studies. Like Karl was a medical doctor, and then so he comes from that background. And Stephanie's from museum studies with an emphasis on curating and leading museum tours using experiential learning and visual thinking strategies as their basis. And she is still currently also creating and leading Buddhist art-based learning experiences as a fresh and applicable way to explore the authentic teachings for new and seasoned practitioners alike. Well, we've just started, exploring this whole area of Dharma art.
Oh,
Yes, so, we're all kind of perking up, aren't we? Wow. Oh. We're just starting to think about how we can introduce that into our Sangha, and so I'm sure we're going to have a lot more conversations about that.
I don't doubt that.
Among other things, yeah.
Hmm.
So yes, she developed and systemized practice curricula and programs, organized and implemented publication departments, and designed and edited many Buddhist publications. So she's been really instrumental in getting the publication side of things going. So she's got an amazing amount of experience, useful experience in that. So she's the long-term, perhaps the first, director of practice instructors for Nalanda Bodhi for decades. And a senior teacher for both Nalanda Bodhi and the Nitata Institute. She also taught Shedra courses at Gampo Abbey's Vidyadhara Institute when it was active.
So did Karl.
Oh, right, you get to say that, so yeah. I don't know what they didn't do. And trained other Sanghas in developing practice instructors. So, perfect. Great. And yes, teachings of valid cognition, that's good, isn't it? Teachings related to Yogacara and Buddha nature, and anything related to bringing the Buddhist teachings into one's experience through application are a special fondness for her. So, right up our street. So, with that introduction, we now move to the topic that we're going to discuss, and we've been discussing all week, so we're not really worried that we're going to dry up. But to get things going, they've both looked at Guru Principle Book and have, I'm sure they have things to say. And we'll start off with Karl explaining what Guru means and how that differs from Lama. And what should we make of the term in general?
Well, I'm not going to explain everything that guru means because that's our discussion, but just I find it helpful if you look at the words in the original languages, like guru in Sanskrit and lama in Tibetan. Lama is not necessarily like a literal translation, because guru has many different meanings, but traditionally what it's explained as when referring to a spiritual teacher, it means literally heavy or weighty, like full of weight. Like, in English you say somebody with gravitas,
That's a good one.
that kind of thing, and it means basically heavy or weighty with qualities. That's how it is interpreted traditionally. So somebody who has a lot of qualities, that's a guru. And that's not really what the Tibetan says literally. Like Tibetan means superior or highest, Lama. And it does not only translate guru, it also translates a number of other Sanskrit words such as Uttara or Uttama, which also means highest. And so I think you could say that originally the term Lama in Tibetan culture was used only for people with high realization. Like originally, if you call somebody a Lama, it was really like, somebody like Dalai Lama or some kind of Mahasiddha type person, not just anybody. So that has definitely changed over the years. And so then, particularly in the Kaji tradition, Lama is kind of the title you give to people when they come out of a 3-year retreat. So that has kind of ingrained that this is what Lama means for a lot of people. But that's not what it originally was. And then also, as you probably have noticed over the last decades, there has been kind of a title inflation in Tibetan Buddhism. So, like everybody who used to be just a monk is now Lama. Every Lama is now a Khenpo. Every Khenpo is like His Eminence. His Eminence is His Holiness, and it goes, like it doesn't go further than that. But so there's that tendency too. So a lot of people call any regular monk Lama also.
Especially in India.
Yeah, so there's that too. So you can see there's a difference in terms of what the term originally means in Sanskrit. But in Sanskrit also these days, if you call somebody a guru, it just means teacher. It could be a school teacher even. So it does not necessarily have a spiritual connection, but originally, yes. And also, just for fun, I looked up word guru, in the dictionary, Sanskrit, and they get like 50 meanings. And interestingly, one of them is difficult to digest. so that, you could say, oh, okay. And another one is haughty, or proud also.
Really?
And there's a number of other things, like, but it also says things like, of high standing, venerable, these things too. So much for now on that end.
And it's interesting, isn't it? In English now, it has its own sort of connotation and meaning. Like people, most Westerners, like ourselves, would feel quite uncomfortable at being called gurus because it has a Western connotation.
Unless it's in a career setting.
Oh yeah?
They're a guru of IT.
Oh yeah, but they wouldn't have the title guru.
In some tech companies,
do
business
they?
cards, they're like IT guru.
Oh, do
Cheeky
they?
ones, like in Silicon Valley and stuff sometimes.
Oh, interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
that didn't make sense. Now you mention it, it sort of makes sense. Yeah, an expert. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's got that kind of connotation. So I don't know any Westerners who would call themselves guru. They might say they are a guru, but they might not. They wouldn't call themselves, I'm guru. Hello, I'm guru. What's it? But they might say, hello.
Haven't met any, but
I
who
might
knows?
say, hello, I'm Lama Shempen. If I know everybody's looking for Lama Shempen, I'll say, yeah, okay, it's me. So. But, yeah. Nonetheless, in our tradition, the key term, we go for refuge in the Guru, the Buddha, the Guru, the Dharma, Guru, the Sangha. The Guru, the one and only Guru, that's our one refuge. So it is the key term for you could say the highest and best of our goal, and the Buddha, the Guru. So it is a general term that we've got to, especially if we're with Tibetans, then they're going to be using this term. So we've got to have some relationship with it, haven't we? Even if we might not use it as a title.
Yeah, sure.
But then if you use the term teacher, Buddhist teacher, you could mean anything. It could be just as somebody who teaches, scripture at school. Teaching, I do the Buddhist bit, So it doesn't have any spiritual inspiration in it. I'm a Buddhist teacher. I mean, like,
Yes, much more
think-
generic.
yeah, generic,
Yeah.
that's what I'm looking for.
If you say that to people and you don't really want to explain much, and they say, "What do you do?" and if you don't feel like talking much, you just say, "Oh, I'm a Buddhist teacher." Most people won't ask anything.
That's right.
It's very dry and kind of like a, okay, that's
Teacher,
nice.
topic, Buddhist,
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Or even Buddhist theologian.
Yeah, that was on Karl's green card, Buddhist theologian.
Is that right?
Yeah,
And you're-
yeah, ironically, yeah.
And your philosopher, no, it was you said you were philosopher on your passport, no.
No, that was.
Oh, no, it was Patty.
Yeah,
She's
yeah,
got occupation philosopher.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to have to deal with prayers and liturgy and teachings that are putting great emphasis on Guru. But then when we look around, who are we talking about in the world? Somebody's got to say, I'm one.
But you know what I found? I really enjoyed reading through this, and there are many helpful things in here. But just to take a sort of bigger contextual view, it helped me to realize, well, one, I'm not a translator, right? So I know, I've been taught that Lama and Guru are translations for each other. So in a sense, they have an equivalent meaning, maybe slightly different nuance. But having grown up in Buddhism only through English, which is amazing that one can do that in this day and age, and it's only gotten more informed and more accurate. What it helped me to realize is, one, I love the title Guru Principle, because when I think Guru, the only way the hard to digest becomes digestible for me is when I think of Guru as an expression of the guiding principle of Buddhism, what lies at the heart. And that expression can take a human form, can take the form of words or image. It can take the form of the environment, the atmosphere. It can take the form of one's own nature if you connect with it. So that's my wiggle room with Guru. And then with Lama, just the conditioning that I've experienced is, which you nicely help break apart in this book, is that, yes, a Lama is someone who's done 3-year retreat, or a Lama is someone who's been given the title Lama based on their, excellent qualities, and it's been granted to them by some mysterious Tibetan higher person. So I'm not saying these are right views, but to me, this exposed to me that I had these ideas about the word that means the same thing, but conjures up all these different things. I would feel extremely uncomfortable to be called a guru, unless it was in a career thing, and then it would be an opportunity to argue with people.
Well,
To
you're
clarify,
You're the
to
expert.
clarify, well, what do you mean by that?
Oh, okay.
Or to be called a Lama because I'm not a 3-year retreatant or anything like that.
I should just call you Lama.
I know. I've heard that.
I'm sure everybody noticed how we all burst out laughing when I did
Yes.
Because we've been talking about this
Yeah.
before, that
Yeah.
we never have been called Lama and we don't want to be called Lama. So.
Yeah.
But I think even Tibetans actually make a difference between Lama and Guru, because
Yes,
if you
I
ask
think so.
a Lama, for example, who has done 3-year retreat,
Mm-hmm.
so you're Lama, yes, of course, yes. And then if you ask them, oh, so then you're a Guru, they would say, no, I'm not a Guru.
It's
So-
interesting because Elizabeth says that they call them drublas. They've done the drubkang, they've done the 3-year retreat, so they're drublas. So that tells you, when somebody's a drubla, it's a Lama who's done a 3-year drubkang retreat, and that tells you they've done a 3-year retreat. It doesn't tell you anything else about them. So they might have done it really well and become very realised, or they might have just fallen asleep for 3 years and come out. Or they might be teaching and using that role as a Lama, or they might have done it, decades ago and sort of forgotten all about it. You get them people like that who sometimes turn up. So it's made it more precise. But on the other hand, if you go to any kind of teaching on Mahamudra, you're told, well, you have to have a Lama. So you're both teachers of Mahamudra. And you actually give, you actually take people through the actual experience that, help them to, pointing out the situation at some level or other. You're involved in that role. So you can't say I'm not a Lama if it's just, you've got no right.
Duly noted.
But you don't have to call yourself Lamas. But if somebody were to say, and like I say, well, if people are calling me Lama, there's no way I'm going to say you're not Lamas, So, and in our Sangha, if people say, well, do you have a Lama in your Sangha? You've got Mahamudra teachings, but do you have a Lama? You have to be able to say yes. So, we have to say yes, but we don't have to make a big deal out of it. It's, in principle, we're Lamas. And to be honest, the way you described guiding principle just then, I'm used to living with Tibetans and I know how they talk and, that's exactly how they use Lama. So they play games with it. So that, if they really don't have faith in somebody at all, but they bow to them, and if that person allows them to, they will do it more and more and more. And from their point of view, you say, well, that's rather cynical, isn't it? But no, because they're doing it in principle. I'm bowing to the Guru. I'm bowing to the Guru, and they are bowing to the Guru. And if you take that up and think, oh, so I'm your Guru, that's your problem. It's not theirs. And so they do play games with people, and it's a bit cruel sometimes because Westerners don't really know what's going on. But I remember in Sonada once, we were going for a picnic, and in the morning we were going for a picnic with Karl Rinpoche and Bokha Rinpoche and all the monks and the whole monastery. This poor French person turned up as a monk, really taking it all very seriously, and sort of came to see the Lama, and the Lama put him on the throne, like Karl Rinpoche put him on the same level as himself. He didn't have a clue any of these customs, so he sat where he was told to sit. He got taken to this picnic, and there was Karl Rinpoche on his throne, and they offered him Bokha Rinpoche's throne, and he took it. He didn't know what he was supposed to do. Bokha Rinpoche sat the other side of him. He sat through this whole picnic, all the other Westerners having fun, and him sitting there feeling really stupid, sitting on this throne and not knowing what was the proper way to get out of this. It was so unfair. And afterwards we got to know him, and he said that was just so horrible, one of the worst days of my life. He had no idea, but it's typical of what they might do to you if you put on airs. It's sort of their ability to kind of see in principle, well, why shouldn't I take you as a guru? Because, and if you pick it up and run with it and you're not worthy of it, well, that's your problem, not mine.
Well, all beings have the potential.
Exactly. So they can kind of play with that, and they do. I could tell you a number of times when they played with that. But it's so unfair for Westerners because, they can't get the joke because they don't have enough cultural,
Don't have the context in the
they don't have
background.
the context,
And they take it as a support, basically. That's this is really the Lama.
Yeah, or whatever.
Endorsement kind of thing.
Yeah, you could easily take, like for example, it's very common for Tibetans to say to a person, oh, if you're kind to them, oh, you're Tara. And then if students hear their teacher being referred to as Tara, yes, you're really an incarnation of Tara, and that's quite natural. It's like when you say, oh, you're an angel in English, oh, you're Tara. But then people say, oh, she was recognised by the Karmapa as Tara. And you can't argue with that because actually anybody could be recognised as Tara because Tara's everywhere. So if you don't understand, and I think guiding principle is quite a good way of putting it, if you don't understand there's this overarching generic sense of the mandala principle and the mandala of awakening, and it's all connected and it's all leading in the same direction, if you don't have that sense, you can't play those games. So I'm hoping that this just helps everybody to join in.
Yeah, and then not to become frightened by the word guru,
That's right.
because you hear these stories, or one might have inadvertently experienced something like that. And also, honestly, in early translations in English and still in some of the material that's translated, the way gurus are described are really, they're just extraordinary beings.
Sitters.
Yeah, with students who are extraordinary in and of themselves, you know, and you're like, oh, well, okay. I think I can go with the principle, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
think it is very confusing because lamas, Tibetans who are monks and are called lamas, well, you know, the Indians all call all Tibetans monks lamas, so they used to be called lama, and they come to the West and they're called lama again. The Westerners are thinking they need a lama who's going to be the person that's going to guide them to enlightenment, and you know they're all ready to have love, you know, devotion and everything to this person, and they don't have any clue that the teachings about how you, like Trungpa Rinpoche talks about, you know, you have your Hinayana, your Mahayana, your Vajrayana Guru, and the Vajrayana Guru is actually a Siddha Guru. They're expecting that from this poor monk who's been sent by their teacher to come and run a Dharma centre. It's just a recipe for disaster, really, from very difficult on both sides, because there's nobody to teach these students, Western students, what this might be, and of course the poor Tibetan is in a completely strange environment.
It's a terrible setup.
And also
Yeah.
they're set up because they're not even in a normal Western environment.
Yeah.
You know, like even if you landed and you were in a family, you'd kind of find out how families work. But if you land in a Buddhist centre, you find out how Buddhist centres work, and they don't. You know, there's nobody to show them how to be a Western Lama.
Yeah.
So these early experiments with Dharma centres have been very challenging all around.
Still are in some places.
Yeah.
I went through the list of the 12 ways that you talk about teacher in here, which is really, I'm gonna keep using it as a reference because it helps me really clarify. For instance, what does a mentor do? You know, what does a lama do? The way you define it. What does the chief lama, shall we say, chiefess lama do, for instance? And I was going through these and I was marking them out of, you know, the various types of mentors we have in the Landabodhi and the Tarta. And one of the things, well, I stopped in a few places, but conducting rituals I thought was very interesting, because a lot of Westerners do not necessarily accept a ritual, but they will from Karl, actually, in our Sangha, from someone who's not a Lama. And
Like Tibetan.
yeah, yeah, a Tibetan, I'm sorry, yeah, sorry.
If
See,
it's a Tibetan
I'm
monk.
so conditioned
Yeah,
to using
if
it
it
that
were a
way.
Tibetan monk.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And for instance, someone moves into a new house and they want to clear the space and bless it. They'll invite over one of the acharyas or the lamas, because
They
that's
would all
their
be
job.
Tibetans. They would all be
Yeah,
Tibetans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or if someone has just died, they'll invite the acharyas and lamas over to, you know, do the rituals for the traditional rituals. But, you know, sometimes Karl will go to those, sometimes I'll go to those. But I've noticed with those things that on the occasion that a Western person is present who actually understands the underlying purpose for the ritual, it's an unexpected surprise for the Westerners who have called the Tibetan acharyas and lamas in a good way, because then they have an understanding and a connection to the meaning of the ritual that they didn't have before, other than just
Magic.
yeah, but and also comfort and
Yeah.
you know, kind of a faith, but that's a faith that doesn't actually have a full description in it.
Mm.
So I found that actually quite interesting. It made me think about it a lot more.
Mm.
So
Yes, and I
you know.
included it because I know a lot of Western teachers don't do rituals. You know, it's not what they do, but that, you know, it's just a function they don't do. But it doesn't mean they're not doing the functions they are doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's no obligation for a teacher to do rituals, you know. And of course in the East, in those Buddhist countries, rituals is what they do for the general population. You know, they're monks and they're living their monk's life, and then when there's a ritual needed, they'll go and do the ritual for people. And you know, your village person who does mantrin, who does the mantras and things to keep evil spirits away and that kind of thing. And when the population go to these people, that's all they're expecting from them. They expect them to live a good life and be, you know, to keep, you know, they're good people and they're honest and keeping their vows and everything, and doing the rituals for them, and that's the relationship. So you're talking about student-teacher relationship. Well, that's a very simple relationship that you might have with a teacher or a guru, whatever, you know. So when you generalise in the West, when we talk about student-teacher relationship, it's not just, I mean, we have our own idea about what a relationship is.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
Yes.
in a way
Yes.
that I don't really find it with Tibetans. I mean, they might have relationships, but they don't have a name for it particularly. You know, they sort of, that would be sufficient. You made your offering and you showed respect, and they led a good life, and they allow you to give your offering, which then you can make punya, and they've allowed you to make punya, and then that gives them a bit of support so they can carry on their life. And it's an energy exchange of some kind, but it's not particularly a relationship as we would understand relationship. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding arises in sanghas where, you know, a Tibetan monk might come out and be appointed by his teacher to be the lama in a centre because we need a lama, okay, he's a lama, okay, so take him on, without knowing what any of that meant. And then expecting a relationship of some kind, and the Tibetan doesn't even know what you're talking about. You know, gets very confused. And of course, especially confused when it comes to the way women, you know, like, are they celibate or not? And it's so confused now, isn't it? I mean, at one time you'd think it's a monk, therefore they're celibate, therefore I need to keep hands off. I mean, there may be people who don't really care about that, but now, these days, because every other monk becomes, you know, stops being a monk, or they carry on pretending to be a monk, but they're sort of having sexual relationships just like other people. But what the Westerner often doesn't understand is that monk probably has no sense of a relationship. You know, not your idea of a relationship. Yeah. So that a lot of hurt happens because of that.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's part of the general meeting of two totally different cultures, you know.
Yes.
And I think both parties a lot of times are not even aware of 5% of how big the differences are, because we both just project, okay, that's what we think, you know, and that's how it should be, and then you only learn over time by reactions, and wow, no, that's not at all how these people are, or how they think, or how they do things at all. And but it's also very difficult to understand that.
I mean, it's difficult enough for us among ourselves, isn't it? We're the same culture. So let alone if you've got a completely different set of assumptions behind it.
But it's, I know I said this earlier, but for the Awakened Heart Sangha, because it's so intentionally set up and in such a well-informed way, I think from the get-go, you've been set up in such a way that you can, a lot of these issues aren't issues because they're not present from the start, which is wonderful.
Yeah, and if we can show it can be done, other people can gain heart from that, and, you know, sort of think, oh yeah, we can do it that way as well.
Yeah.
Especially if you don't have to answer to any Tibetan.
Yeah, that's a very different dynamic. obviously, because I mean, I think
I've noticed
the biggest culture clash you have is between, I don't know, English and Welsh maybe, or some other people,
that's quite a big
but
one.
not,
Yeah.
but not. There's no like more ancient Asian culture involved. Per
Yeah,
se.
that's
and
right.
and you have that background also because you
Yes,
know that, so
yeah.
you can
Yes.
interpret a lot of things that coming from the scriptures or the coming from the Tibetan tradition.
Yes, and
You're not just the translator for the words; you're a cultural translator.
it's true. It's true. I can say things that I know Tibetan won't be able to argue with. You know, like they might be expecting a certain kind of thing, and then I can just answer them. Like, for example, when this business about the Karmapa came up, and I said to my students, well, you can just say, oh, Khenpo Rinpoche's Karmapa for me. And they said, well, what would any other Tibetan think about this? I said, try it on the next Tibetan. So this Lama Yoshi came, some Lama that I met, and we were just chatting, and I said, yeah, we were talking about this Karmapas, and I said, yeah, for me, Khenpo Rinpoche's Karmapa. And he looked at me, You can't argue with that.
Oh, checkmate.
He was happy enough with it. He was happy enough with it. Which, nobody tells you that. If you're a Westerner, you wouldn't know you could say that.
No.
You didn't know you could cut through the whole thing by saying something like that. But, so, well, I guess it's the blessing of Trungpa Rinpoche that he sent me to go and absorb go and absorb the vibes, he called it. But, I did end up just going there and being with Tibetans and thinking of myself as a novice nun and being, showed respect for the other senior nuns. And, they sort of took me under their wing, and I kind of heard what they were saying and how they were saying it and could join in. And it does help. It does help a lot because although we might have difficulties with Tibetans because it's a different culture, like with our own culture, there's the good side of our culture and there's the other side of our culture. And I really feel I was really privy to some really good aspects of Tibetan culture. And that's put me in good stead. Yeah. And we've had some really good contacts, haven't we? With Lama Phuntsok and Drupal Khenpo and Khenpo Namgyal. Some really, really positive exchanges and feeling of connection with Tibetans. Where should we go from here?
Well, we could go through the different roles of the guru.
Yeah. And also be interesting to see what, for example, the roles that stand out for you that you're playing. Like, for example, you'd have to say you're playing the role of example, and you could maybe even notice what examples you have built you've been influenced by. Like you see some teachers have been an example for you, even though you might not have had spent much time with them as a personal one. And then there's the role of receiving offerings, which I think is a really interesting one. Because as an Oriental teacher, one of your main roles is to accept offerings, and then you get lots and lots of offerings, and then you can use them to do good things to help your students with. It's a model that works, but as a Westerner, maybe you haven't experienced very much of that.
Yeah, that, and then also I think there's not the culture of that. Like in Asia, the main job of the lay Buddhist community is to support the monastic community. Like the dharma aspect, that is the practice actually of the lay people traditionally. And most of them, they don't think, oh yeah, I want to meditate or anything like that, or I want to study. That's rare actually. And there's also not that many opportunities. But I mean, here it's totally different because in the West, like most people, they also want to meditate and also want to study. And so, yeah, I think there's no cultural, where people, okay, I give whatever, 1/3 of my salary to the guru, Like in Chinese culture, that's, happens. Or they give 1/10, and that's, a lot of people do that actually.
It
Like
used
also
to be in the
Taiwan.
West. It used to be in the West.
Tithing.
So it's a totally different ballgame.
Completely different ballgame. Yeah.
But when I came to that part in here, I
Yeah.
thought about in our mentor culture, when Punlop Rinpoche was training some of the mentors, he gave 2 training weekends, and they were about 3 years apart. In the second training weekend, he said, "Oh, I've come up with a new form that I'd like you to adopt when you meet with your mentees." And he said, "When you can, I'd like to." So initially, you would meet with someone, you'd be seated, across from each other at a certain point. And he had said, "Now you have to introduce to them not only an understanding of bowing, but you have to invite them to bow to you in the sense of Guru principle, and that you are not bowing to them. So you are receiving this, so to speak, from them." Has anybody adopted that? This was years ago.
It's interesting, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah,
It's interesting that he said that, because that
Yes.
is that role of
Yeah.
accepting.
you have.
Yeah.
It is taught that
Yes.
to not accept genuinely offered generosity and offerings.
Is denying somebody the opportunity.
Yes, you're cutting off that Dharma.
Mm,
Yeah, so it's very interesting. I think about that a lot, actually.
it's very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and a lot of people wish for an outlet like that, where they really want to express something. I mean, I know this is maybe not the quite type of offering you're talking about, but
No, you don't.
I
would
naturally
include
will
that.
do this too, or I will.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh,
I want to do frustrations.
Yeah, or
if
just-
I don't frustrate to you, who do I frustrate to?
yeah, or you want to say thank you, or
Yeah.
you genuinely want to express appreciation that's
Yeah.
supportive of what that person's doing in whatever form that takes. So
It's vital. I mean, we've got
Yeah,
to have some
it's
equivalent
interesting.
if we're going to have Buddhism in the West. I mean, we've got to have some equivalent. And it's a very tricky topic, but
Yeah,
we're going
it
to
is.
have to deal with it.
I think, I mean, I have thought about this a lot because people do all kinds of things,
yes,
And once you're in a position, of any sort of kind of teacher, no matter what level, people start projecting onto you, whether you like it or not. And the range is as wide as you can think of. And so people do all kinds of different things, and including bowing and all those things, And I think, like that's like the doing the Anjali and bowing to people. I mean, that's not really something that we do in Western culture as a regular thing, like to anybody really ever. And
Yeah,
so I'm not in principle against it, but I think what needs to be clear: are you doing this because you're mimicking another cultural tradition, or are you doing this because that's how you feel? Right? I think that's a big difference. And then if people do it because it really comes from the heart, then it doesn't matter which gesture it is. It could be anything. It could be Anjali. It could be something else. Whatever. But I think that needs to be clear, because what I see is a lot of people just mimicking what they see other people doing without having the context, and then it becomes some kind of kind of a lemming thing.
Yeah.
They do it, so I do it.
And I remember at one point when we first got going, I stopped coming in and frustrating to the shrine, because it was a beginner's thing, and I'd come and bow to the shrine, and then I'd give a talk, and then any questions? Yes, why did you bow to the shrine? I thought, I don't want to be asked that. So I stopped doing it for a long time, but then habit brought me back into doing it. But people come in here, you see, and they've been introduced to discovering the heart of Buddhism. It's all about their experience and things that they're familiar with, and then they come in here and they see these tankers and they think, oh, I didn't sign up for this, and they want to run away. Why are these tankers here? People gave them to us. What are you supposed to do? You know, you can't. And then at some point, people want them. So you've got, once you've become around for a while, they want them. And then the people who come in who haven't seen them before, I think, oh, hang on, I didn't sign up for this. It's quite tricky, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other,
Area.
wide area these days because, obviously a lot of people, they don't like religion.
Yes.
They like spirituality or they're interested, but they don't like organized religion. Whatever they mean by that, which could also be a lot of different things. And then, some people, organizations or religious communities, they go to the extreme of basically taking off everything that could vaguely look religious, and present a total neutral, non-denominational face. But I'm not sure that's the way to go, because then what are you? Where is your identity? If you have nothing to distinguish yourself from basically anybody else, or if you have to hide who you actually are or what your spiritual path is, then who are you attracting, or what one message does that send? So I think I think that it's good if there's a clear identity. It doesn't have to be like in the face and all over the place marketing kind of thing, but as you say, right, there needs to be a clear vision, and ideally that should be visible in some way, because people looking for something, and if you don't show that, they might be looking for something completely different. Like we get that sometimes, in the Land Bodhi, they have some idea what this is about, and then they come in and then they say, oh, that's not at all what I thought it is.
As they get frustrated
Then,
because you've not had a good chat beforehand.
So they're not looking for Buddhism, and they suddenly find it is Buddhism, or
yeah, things like that, Like one person who even was the general manager of, our main center, it turned out after some time, she really was looking for like activism group,
Oh, I see, yeah.
So that's why I think, you, in my view, you need to be having a clear vision and then make that visible, so that you are identifiable as, okay, this is what we do here.
And I liked what you were saying yesterday about not hiding. Like, there's such a tendency, perhaps even the way we've been brought up at school or something, even, that you're trying to perform and give the impression that is demanded of you. And so you're trying to fit in, and then if you're trying to sort of hide behind, am I able to appear to be what I'm supposed to be, which would mean I don't show who I really am, and then that makes it really difficult when you're confronted to asked to talk about your experience. You were talking about this yesterday, weren't you? That people need to be coaxed.
A little,
Coaxed
sometimes.
out from behind their
But I think that's also a function of teacher.
Yes.
Lama is the way you describe it. I don't know where it would fall
well,
in the
yeah,
list.
I think if we jump over the pointing out instruction one, but then you come to just, you've got you've got teachers who teach doctrine, who might go through a text or something with you, but then you've got teachers who teach you practices. So they might come in and teach you how to meditate, or teach you how to experience things in a direct way, and then you've got teachers who actually take you by the hand and talk you through what you need at this particular time, and over time, sort of taking care, more pastoral care kind of. And then you've got teachers who are taking on their role within a Sangha community. So they're working as a team with other teachers on a curriculum of some kind. And they all overlap, of course, but some teachers they would not teach other than within their particular role within the Sangha. And then some teachers, well, there's no Sangha there for them, so they just have to do the whole job themselves. So where were you? You were talking about the role of, when I took over, what were you just saying?
Actually, what I was going to say is that This example that you brought up of the person that was thinking it was Buddhism, but then found out what they really wanted was like some kind of what they thought of as compassionate activism. That if you are acting in a role as teacher, I think whether you accept that label or not, but if you're caring for people who are approaching the Sangha, maybe wanting to be in a Sangha, wanting to be a Buddhist, then it's very kind to be clear with people and to draw out through asking them, well, what is it that you want? What is it that you think you're becoming involved with? How would you describe that? Oh, that's interesting. Here's what we offer overlaps with that, and here's where we certainly don't offer that. And in having that conversation, it is an educational exchange, but it's a kind one because it brings clarity to the intention of the person involved, and it helps them in the end, whether they join the Sangha or not. So I think that's also really important.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's a very kind thing to do.
I'm just thinking, as you're saying that, I'm thinking, at what stage do we do that, do you think?
Partly what Maybar does at the beginning.
Definitely the initial.
The initial interview.
However, perhaps it becomes even more crucial when people have completed the first round of discovering the heart of Buddhism, and then we send them off into a wider, what we call wider living the awakened heart, and from then on, it is down to the mentee and the mentor to decide on the path, almost like what is it that they need to do next, sort of thing, and that often goes into different practices, perhaps deepening them. So maybe that would correspond. But we haven't developed it as much as we could have.
Yeah.
You know, like there's still a lot of work.
Yeah.
I think one thing that I've noticed is that you can have a getting to know you interview, and even if the person, this doesn't happen all that often, but it's just an interesting thing I find, that they want to be part of a Buddhist Sangha, and they're convinced that everything that you say is like, yes, that's what I want, and then perhaps they go through some curriculum and practice, and whoever they're working with, their mentor or their lama, then would ask them again, well, so how is this for you? Is this the Buddhism that you had in mind now that you're more familiar? Because the enthusiasm has had time to change, not necessarily wear out, but change. And so there's an invitation in some ways to be open and really say, yes, this isn't quite what I had in mind, but yeah, I like this, or this is good, it's fulfilling what I kind of want to go towards or what I'm drawn to, or this is great, and it's not quite what I thought, and I think maybe I need to look for something else. So it's not like, I'm not suggesting in any way that one drives people away, but to give the gift of that clarity, that opportunity to express their experience and to work in the best way with that for them at that time, and to always leave things open. So I think that's also an interesting role of a mentor and a teacher, is to bring clarity.
And I think in some ways, maybe that's what we're doing in the DHB when we're talking about the heart wish. We get people to look at what they really want, and why they want that, and why that, and to kind of go back to something that's pre-verbal almost, of what, maybe you end up saying happiness, maybe you don't, maybe you say something like ease, but linking into something that you do actually in the end recognise, this is what I want. It's not something I'm imposing on myself, it's like, and then as you say, you could go from there. But I think this is what you're saying in this about experiential, what is it, how did you phrase it? based learning experience on a fresh that was the, you know what I mean, about how it's experiential, isn't it?
Experience-based learning or something
Yeah,
like that.
experience-based learning,
Yes,
which is very much our approach as well, isn't it? It's all very much about experience and your own use of words. You know, like finding the experience, talking with each other about the experience, and say, well, I wouldn't call that, I'd call it, and you might be using different words for that, but to respect that, because I find it's very difficult for a word to gain different connotations. If a certain word has certain connotations, even though I know it's not being used in that way, every time it is used in that way, even after decades, it still triggers that old association, which is very annoying. But once you recognise that, it's, you know, in the way we talk to our mentees, if you like, or the people we're discussing Dharma with, to really respect that if that word triggers that response, there's not much you can do about it. So if, for example, the word faith takes you off in the wrong direction, you've just got to find another way. Even though I can justify using faith over and over, but if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And yeah.
Well, I guess, you know, you could add that to the list of jobs of the guru.
Yeah.
Like in this culture, you know, which words convey what you want to convey and which words give people a wrong impression. And then since people come from so many diverse backgrounds, there's probably more and more words that give people a wrong impression about something.
Yeah.
So I think that's a complication issue that did not exist in like traditional Asian Buddhist communities, because most people were on the same page, right?
Yeah.
Like there wasn't that much diversity. So I think, you know, one of the jobs of any Buddhist teacher these days is to take into account what we call diversity, which hasn't been that diverse in the history of Buddhism as it is now. Like not just that you have all kinds of Buddhist different groups and schools in one place, which also never happened in Buddhist history ever before. Like you wouldn't have a Theravada center and then you have a Vajrayana center and a Zen center and all in the same place, you know, impossible. That's the first time in history, you know. And then so people also do, you know, hopping.
Shopping,
Buddhist island hopping, you know. So they go to Zen people for some sitting, they go here to study something, they do this and that. So there's a lot of, the whole thing is much more fluid than it ever used to be.
Yeah.
And so that also, I think, throws a different light on the, you know, what would be an actual guru-student relationship in a cultural context where, I don't know how to say it, but non-commitment is actually valued higher than, you know, committing to one path or one group or something like that.
It's a very interesting point, isn't it?
Because we see that actually a lot also in, you know,
people resisting commitment.
And also people, you know, going to all kinds of different groups.
It's not their habit, it's not what they're looking for. They're not looking for a home, so to speak, or, you know. They're just looking for experiences. And they don't have to be connected.
That's right, and it's kind of nice on the internet. You can just sort of pop in and out of, and there's no real relationship. You don't do any supporting of it. You just dip in and out, and you just help yourself. You know, like a.
Yeah, it was even before the whole that everything was online. Even before that, you know, physically, also people were going to different places.
It's at some point, and maybe that's why these older sanghas are all recognising they were not attracting young people. But if we can keep a steady stream of people who've been through that phase where they realise, actually, I'm not going to get anywhere unless I do commit. So then they're likely to be older. But maybe it doesn't matter if we don't get the young ones, if they keep coming to the stage of realising, actually, I need to commit. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to make any progress. And then offering people training in a commitment, because, you know, if it's not suggested to you that a commitment is needed and this is how you do it, how do you express that commitment? And so I've met Buddhists in other sanghas who they want to express that commitment, but they don't know how to do it because in their Sangha there's nothing like that. You know, the teacher turns up, you know, gives the teaching and is off again, and they don't have the commitment even though they want it. And then after a long time, they want to somehow feel, I've got to a stage where I can give back, but they can't give back because there's no structure to the Sangha. You know, you just come and listen to talks and go away again.
I think that's very frustrating, you know, and frustrating with lots of different flavors, because if your heart is really gravitating towards something like that, it's like you're being fed sugar all the time, but you don't have proper nutrients, you know?
Yes.
There's no, so you want something genuine and you are getting something genuine, but there's no place for it to be planted and cultivated and that you experience over time and notice the effects.
Yes.
And then as Sangha manifest those, and without even meaning to, you influence other people as well as yourself.
That's right.
So
We were talking about that, how encouraging students to train to be mentors is the best way really for them to continue to learn. You know, in the spiral learning, you've done the course once and now you're going through with other people, that helps you to learn more and to stress that. And then of course there's this culture builds up of people wanting to help each other and then benefit themselves and others. So it's not so much that I've now done it once so I can tell you how it is.
right, yeah.
But I've done it once and, you know, I want to go around it again and, you know, let's talk about it. It creates a kind of, that's how we do it, isn't it, basically? And keep going round and round.
Yeah, that brings up another interesting aspect of the whole thing. I mean, that's also what Paulo Bremije keeps saying, like, when you start teaching people in whichever function, whether you're a practice instructor or formal teacher or something, that's the point when you actually really learn the stuff. Because you have to be clear in order to present it to other people, and then also people give you feedback and coming up with questions and issues that you wouldn't have thought about on your own. Or even if you were studying with a group before, maybe that wasn't coming up. So it's actually a joint venture. Like the teaching situation is, for me at least, it's always a joint venture. It's not like, you know, like this up-down, top-down thing where there's one person who knows everything and then there's other people who don't know anything. But it's, you know, it's mutual actually. Like the so-called students also educate the teacher, and the teacher has something to offer, obviously, but it's totally mutual. It's not a one-way situation at all. And you can see that actually in the you know, when you look at the Buddhist sutras, most of them are basically discussion groups.
Yes.
Right? Really, they're transcripts of discussion groups.
Yes.
Like, it's not that the Buddha keeps talking from, you know, page A to 500. Sometimes the Buddha doesn't even say anything. Like, it's other people talking, and then, or sometimes the Buddha asks them, they ask the Buddha, they talk amongst each other, and then he says, hey, what do you think? So it's actually very interesting, you know. So
And it's
I
also,
try to follow that model if I can, you know, to have the whole class more like that kind of discussion. You know?
Dialogue,
Not
yeah.
wait till the end necessarily to have Q&A, or, you know, when people think something, then online is very difficult with a lot of people, but live it's much easier. Because I think then that whole, you know, dynamic of that it's actually a joint venture that really comes out.
and it's also interesting that the Buddha often, if not always, checks when he uses a word if the person who hears the word understands it in the same way. I found that really interesting. Okay, so you agree that, you know, this is how we're using this word. Okay, then I will use it, which I think is really good modelling for us how we are doing that. Yeah.
In the classifications of reasonings, the Tarig, the premise for putting forth a correct reasoning, or putting forth a statement that you'd wish that you want to make and engage in clear conversation, is that you must both parties must understand the term, the meaning, and it must be of interest to them. It's
Oh,
called the
interesting.
flawless subject in question.
It must interest them.
It must be of interest to them, to both parties. Whatever the topic is, it must be of interest when they know what it means.
Right.
It must be of interest. So, for instance, if we were to have a discussion and you said, headboards. Headboards are made of wood
Right.
because they must be sturdy. I'd be like, headboards? You mean like on a bed? And you'd be like, yes, this is what I mean. I'm like, I don't want to talk about that. I'm not saying that you would say that. I don't mean it like that, but you know what I mean? It's a very silly example, but there has to be understanding and mutual interest.
Right.
So I always love that. I find that true.
So, like, if you wanted to discuss football with me,
Then you'd have to talk to Karl.
well,
Yeah.
he wouldn't talk to me about it.
No,
It's not a flawless subject in question.
it's not a subject at all.
Yeah. But that's the basis for that's the basis of debate, which is meant to be a clarifying conversation and a sharing exchange in the way that it just made me think of that because you were saying that you noticed this in the things.
But it's very interesting, isn't it?
I think so.
When there's so much discussion, teacher-student relationship in the West, people tend to talk about it's a relationship. But actually, what we're saying now is, yes, it is a relationship in the sense of a dialogue. And so this idea of, well, you've got more responsibility because you're the teacher, so therefore, you're in a position of power. Actually, well, there's some misconception going on from the very beginning because it's a dialogue.
A lot of times it is, yeah. I mean, sometimes it's not, but a lot of times I would think,
What did you have in mind that it isn't?
well,
Sage on the stage.
let's say, look at Marpa Milarepa life story. A lot of
Oh,
it was
yes.
certainly not a dialogue.
Yes.
It was like, okay, you build this tower, end of story.
But that was a dialogue, wasn't it? Without
And
a
that's
lot
the
of words.
Siddha guru.
Yeah,
He knows what he's doing.
but I'm
Yeah.
saying,
No, that's
sometimes it's not. Or
That's just checking what you meant by
like
that. Yes.
they talk a lot about the guru's command,
Oh,
which
yes,
is
yes.
not a command is not a dialogue. So I think we need also to be clear on those situations, right?
That's an interesting one. That comes up particularly in Vajrayana Abhisheka context, doesn't it? I will.
Yeah, and Samaya and all those kinds of things.
And there's a lot of discussion in there about to what extent and at what point is one actually signing up to be obedient.
I think it's very helpful, all those explorations, because it causes a reflection. For me, it causes a reflection when I read this, which is a form of dialogue.
Good.
Yeah, so...
So what comes up for you about obedience?
That goes back to the guru principle, to what is the guiding principle? Obedience, oath,
To the guiding
bondage,
principle.
samaya, refuge, bodhisattva vow, to me, always mean that you will recognize increasingly the guiding principle of Buddha nature, bodhicitta, however you wish to describe it, is the life force for everything. It was the center of the mandala, the ground zero for all expression, and that no matter what the circumstances, you will find a way to be informed by the circumstance within that context, and if not, then at least search through what you've learned and know, or ask someone that you trust, and then proceed. So it's always appropriate. It's just not forgetting to be guided by that principle, and that if you've taken refuge, you have basically said that fundamentally from the beginning.
So you're not hearing it as being, if a person tells me to do something, I would have to do it. You're not hearing it that way.
If I have a teacher like that, where I have that kind of relationship,
Right.
which
I would have to have signed up for.
I might have done such a thing, and I do things that I'm asked to do that normally I would feel extremely uncomfortable doing. Not that they go against my moral principles or I think they're hurting anybody. It's just like simply like, what?
I wouldn't have chosen to do
No,
that.
I wouldn't have chosen to do that. But because you're asking and you are, I trust
And I
that
signed
you
up for
hold
this.
this. I trust that you hold this principle supreme amongst all the possible possibilities in the whole world, and that for me you demonstrate this. I will trust this and I will try it, and I will try and find the principle in this command in action. How will I find that? So I think of it like a mysterious puzzle. That's how I think of it. I kind of aim into the mysterious puzzle part, and then it becomes interesting, and at times it can be very, very upsetting too, I find. But in that upsetness, if I keep thinking about the guiding principle, there's some great stuff to be had there. Like really, that I learned things I never ever would have put myself in a position to learn, ever. So that's a little
tempted to
more
ask-
than I
I
wanted to say.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm tempted to ask for an example, but I think
No, let's save that for some
that
other
wouldn't be
time.
fair.
But I don't know. I mean, what do you think, Karl?
Well, I mean, there's obviously so many levels to this, but I think, you know,
yes.
I mean, there's obviously a difference. Like, let's say you have a guru to whom you have committed to whatever extent that is. And then, you know, there's things or there's situations maybe where that guru might ask you to do something you would normally never do. And it's just uncomfortable. And it can be extremely uncomfortable and extremely embarrassing. That's one thing, like challenge. Another thing is when you think what is asked of you is morally wrong or actually harmful, either to yourself or somebody else. I think there's, you know, and that can be a very tricky and fine line sometimes. Like, you know, and also if it's a situation where it's not just about you, but other people, then it becomes can be very tricky. If it's only about you and the guru, then it's always up to you. Okay, am I willing to take on this challenge or not? If it's a challenge, right? And then it's basically how much are you willing to stretch and go out of your comfort zone. Like Paul Rinpoche always tells this story, you know, from when he was with Camp Rinpoche in Vietnam, and he was, and then there was a tourist boat to a pilgrim site, like a very famous temple, and they were selling pajamas to the tourists, you know, Vietnamese made pajamas on the boat. And then Khenpo Rinpoche bought two, like for Rinpoche and Ari, his translator.
Right.
And then first Paul Rinpoche said, they thought, oh, that's very nice of Rinpoche, he never buys presents for us. So he gave them the two pajamas and he said, okay, now you put them on the boat. You know, there was also no change room or anything, so they went behind some whatever, put on those pajamas instead of the robes, you know. Rinpoche had robes on. And then, of course, everybody looked at them like... And then Khenpo Rinpoche said, okay, now you sing and dance in your pajamas on this tourist boat. You know. Okay, and then they came to the landing station there, you know, and then Paul Rinpoche said to Khenpo Rinpoche, okay, I'll change back into my robes because we're going up to the temple. And Khenpo Rinpoche said, no need, just stay in the pajama. So they went up to the temple, and the nuns there, they got really angry, seeing them in the pajama. You know, that was that too. And then they went back
So
on
Rinpoche
the
was
boat.
still with them? Or they
Yeah,
went-
he was there the whole time.
All right, okay.
And then they went back, you know, and then they went back to the hotel.
Yeah.
And then Paul Rinpoche said, okay, for dinner I'm gonna change, you know. And then Khenpo Rinpoche again said, no, you stay in your pajama. So they had to go to the buffet in the hotel also in the pajama. And, you know, like Vietnamese people are very polite, you know. So the person at the reception in the hotel in the dining room said, oh, very nice pajama, sir. Like, very nice pajama, sir. And Rinpoche said, I know. So there's that kind of thing. Look, you know, you can say, well, that's a very big stretch, right,
It
in
is a
terms
big
of your
stretch.
comfort zone. And, then there were those nuns who were obviously upset, how do you deal with that, And I mean, Cambridge was there, so I mean, you trust him, he knows what he's doing. But, that's kind
It
of
would have been a challenge for
iffy,
them as
right?
well. It's a real challenge for
Yeah,
them.
yeah, but, did they ask for it? No, definitely not. I mean, Cambridge is not their guru.
Right.
So, so then you sometimes get into these situations. But I mean, I don't think anybody was harmed, obviously, in that situation
Yeah.
as such, but
What good did it do?
I think that's one of the, the areas where the whole thing gets very tricky, Is it still a challenge or is it actually becoming, abuse? Where's the line, and
Yeah.
how many other people are involved,
Yeah.
and what does it do to them? So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's where it gets really
And reputation. There's a lovely, I think is it in one of the Buddhist sutras, I think, the Buddha says that a friend protects your reputation. And like for those nuns to have that happen, and then people mocking that, having seen that and mocking it, hearing about it, and then mocking the reputation of and losing faith and that kind of thing, and you have to then deal with it.
well. You can also look at it the way that the nuns then actually stood up to their function or their responsibility to actually protect the integrity of the temple. It's also another way how you could
Yeah.
look at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a new
But,
legend. They repelled the crazy pajama Westerners
Well, yeah, or Tibetans.
or Tibetans. Yeah.
It was Puna she was having to wear the
Yeah,
pajamas. Yeah.
He and Ari both.
Yeah. Oh God.
So I mean, imagine yourself in that situation, right?
Oh,
What
gosh.
would you do?
I remember the Sakya when he came to talk in London, Shambhala Centre. I think it must have been after Trungpa Rinpoche died. I think he was doing his rounds, and he was describing that how Trungpa Rinpoche used to get on the plane, tell his students to sit at different places in the plane, and he came in with his his European, his army uniform from some, as if he looks like some general from some African state or something. And he sits there and he said, and you can ask the person next door who they think I am, and then you can report back to me afterwards. And then the Sakya sort of told us this story. I've forgotten what it was about, and then why he was telling the story. And it was so embarrassing. Like he couldn't find anything else to say, and I thought it was really, like you were saying, a challenge for all of us. It would be, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And it's beyond concepts. You can't conceptualize any reason why that would make any sense.
Well, when you talk about that level of guru, then there's lots of these things
Yes.
that
Yes.
don't make any sense from an ordinary point of view. And the question is, are you going to step into that and see what happens or
Yeah.
not?
Yeah.
And that's,
And that's where this.
and it's very personal. Like you can't, like it's never the same for any two people. Like it's a very personal interaction between that particular teacher and that particular student in that particular situation.
That would be the challenger guru.
It is a challenge to
Yes.
do, and the thing about those stories that we all tell, when we've run into them or that you get them. The thing about those stories is that there are people, they're kind of showmen, that's their style. They see this as something that they can do to their students, and the students are put in the same position as we would be with a siddha, but the teacher isn't a siddha. So what happens then? And this obviously was going on in Tibet a lot, because you get so many these gurus complaining about, people who are not realized at all these days go around acting like they're siddhas.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they act like this, and then the people don't know, is it me that doesn't recognise they're siddhas, or is it they're just showing off?
But I think this also points out another role of the teacher. I'm not sure which name it would fall under. That, you know, when someone is engaging in the Buddhist path, one learns the view, and you learn when you are connecting with the path and when you aren't. You use different methods like meditation or certain activities or contemplations and things like that. But it's so important for, let's say, a mentor-mentee relationship, is just easier to talk about, that the mentee has an opportunity to understand whatever experience they're having is their experience, and that they must trust their experience and be able to know and have confidence when they are connecting with the intended experience in line with the practice or the study that they're doing, and that they know that that is the case. Because you can have a lot of people that will really commit to a path, and I will do this and I will do that and blah, 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 but they never end up having the internal confidence. And I don't mean bluster. I mean just actually knowing, yes, I can cook a potato. Yes, I know when I'm sitting shamatha. I know what that experience is, and I know the nuances of it. And I think that if you enter into a challenger guru relationship without having that very personal and understanding of one's own experience, then you know, that's troublesome, because you have no reference at all. I mean, despite the fact that we're going beyond references, but you know, that's a very volatile and potentially harmful situation. So I think that's
where
a role
abuse
of a
starts to
teacher.
happen, isn't it?
Exactly. You are each person, whether you're a student or a teacher, or you're both, because we're always both, is to be empowered gradually into the stability and confidence of your experience, and to be able to know that without being, oh yeah, I'm like blah, 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 but just to know it is, yes, I live at this address, or yes, I can rest briefly for a nanosecond. I can do that. I know that. You know, like just, I think that's really a really important role of a mentor, or a lama, or teacher.
Discovery and trusting.
That, but to
Discovering within yourself. the
yes, but
experience,
also
and
sharing
trusting it.
that with whoever you're working with. You know, like cultivating that in
them, so
yes,
they
yes.
make the same discovery, they make the same discovery,
Yes.
and they learn to trust that.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's one thing
That's
to
the
get a
rock
momentary
bottom.
experience,
Yes.
it's another to realise that's what I'm trusting.
Yes, exactly. And that's also a guiding principle. It is guru principle too, a form of it, I think. So I think that's really, really important. What do they say? The students tapping from the inside of the egg, and the teachers tapping from the outside.
Oh really? That's a lovely image.
Yeah.
I've not heard that image.
Yeah, I think what you just said, I think that's that's actually, I think also that's very important, because I see that with all the people I'm working with in terms of their meditation and their practice, it's always about, am I doing it right? You know, and most people think I'm not doing it right. There must be something wrong, or I had this experience, but I don't know, and so I think that is actually a form of empowerment, in my view. If you encourage people to, of course, be aware of what they experience, and then take it as just that, and trust this also, like, this is my experience genuinely that I have, and if it doesn't conform to the book, it doesn't matter. That's not what it's about. It's about your experience, which is neither good nor bad. Experience is never good or bad, never right or wrong. It's an experience. So I think if one can convey that to people, well, this is what's happening in you right now, so this is what you're working with. You're not working what is said in a book that, was written by somebody else, maybe for somebody else. Like this is what's happening with you, so you need to work with that, and then you can compare that to what is maybe said or written somewhere else, but you have to
It's personal.
You have to experience.
go your
Yes.
path based on your experience. You can't
Yeah.
walk the path based on somebody else's experience.
Or descriptions that you never experience.
And that's why it can only really be done, this pointing out role, I think can only be done one-to-one. Because even with two people who are very close, I can't talk to them in this way, two people at once.
No.
Because it's so individual, and it's that there's that sense that they're, as I said to you this morning in a way I'd never said it before, but it's like they're responding, and I'm speaking about actually my own experience perhaps, or they're speaking about their own experience, and I'm recognizing that in myself, and then I might say something and then it lands with them, and what they say then reflects back to me. And there's that kind of energy that goes, energy is a too weak a word, but it's a kind of knowingness that's kind of, you might say a word here or there, but it's how it's landing and you're responding that tells you, oh, we're having this real experience of something. And then your role as your teacher is to make sure the student values that. And so often when people arrive in that sort of space of, sometimes we call it not knowing, you can't know it, you can't reduce it or switch it or change it into anything else. It's so alive, and you don't know, you can't answer, you can't say anything, and then I don't know. Panic. I don't know, I can't answer that. Come back. Actually, that place of not knowing, that's the place to stay, because that's where it's going to open from. But even when you've done that for decades in your practice, you still notice there's that tendency to kind of, it's almost like the conflict between, I want to stay there, but I don't know how to stay there, so I'm going to reject it. Something like that. And it's like almost like a reflex action, like it always happens, however much you know. This is a reflex action, it still happens.
That's why I like the word familiarizing
Yes.
better.
Yes.
Meditation is too loaded now.
It is, and
It's
certainly
not accurate enough.
Yeah, there's certainly, it's ter sam gom, it's listening, and that's that whole process of dialogue and then reflection. And in the Kanki Sutta, where it says you reflect on it and you decide if you agree with it or not. So first you hear it, then you listen. No, you listen, then you hear, then you reflect, and then you decide, do I agree with it or not? Which I think is a stage it isn't usually named. And then if you do agree with it, then you try and familiarise yourself with it, and then you get the experience in the body, and it leads to the final realisation of the truth. I didn't have forgotten exact words, but it's very, for me, this role of pointing out, we were talking about this earlier, about this general term, have you had pointing out instruction, you go into another, you can come if you've had a pointing out instruction, and that's being used in a kind of a formulaic way these days. Tick the box, you've had it. But actually, it's the heart of the whole transmission process. And, we were talking about this is a whole area that's to talk about more, I think, especially among us Westerners who are trying to find our own way of talking about this. So I'm looking forward to, I really enjoyed talking about it this morning with you, and gradually I've got it recorded so we can gradually carry on this conversation among ourselves and with both of you. I think there's a.
It's a very nice opportunity.
I think
Because
it's
who asks you to talk about these things?
me.
Yes. Yay.
Yes, but that's true. This is what people are saying now about me.
Yes.
You ask the questions that nobody else dares ask.
That's good. This is
Yeah.
great.
Okay, that's all I'm happy with. I'm noticing the time.
Mm-hmm.
But, we could leave it there because we're not going to finish the topic today.
No?
No, with
I
another case.
thought we did.
No. As with so many other things, we've merely scraped the surface. Sorry. So, I mean, really very, very grateful for you having come
Well,
to actually be
thank
here
you.
in
Thanks
person.
for the invitation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Really.
and
Discussion.
I hope that, we can keep reeling you in, Come again.
We'll be sitting there like,
With your mouth. No, I'm sure this is going to be very, very helpful for Sangha to be in discussion with you, and I'm really happy.
Yeah,
Thank
me
you very
too.
much. Yeah.
thank you
And I
very
can see,
much.
look at them all
And
there,
thank
all-
you,
all
yeah.
day. The tails are wagging.
I'm always so curious what questions people have. Of course, I'm like, I wonder what questions people
So I
have.
don't know. Are
But we can't
are they
ask.
putting questions on chat?
Okay.
Are they?
They haven't been asked to, but we can ask them if you like.
So that, they're very welcome to put questions up on the chat if they want to, and we can think about how we're going to answer them. So,
Yeah, that's a good idea.
mm.
Yeah. Not today, though. I mean, we won't answer them today, but
No,
we can
but
collect them.
we'll have
That
them,
would
and
be
we'll get
good.
a sense of what people want to ask more.
Yeah, because there might be a trend.
Well, there will be. There will be. Yes. Oh, what do you mean? One specific trend that we can
Yeah,
address?
like an aspect that
they particularly want to know
or
about.
2 or 3 or
Ellie
something.
wants to ask you something.
Yes.
Thank you, Karl. Sorry, Lama, just to clarify, would you like me to do a Google form and then people can take time to write questions, or would you like people quickly to put questions in?
No, take your time.
Take their time. So I'll send a form out.
Right, good. Okay. We dedicate this punya to the enlightenment of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings realize complete and perfect awakening. May the heart's awareness awaken in the unawakened. Where it has begun to stir, may it never fade, and may it awaken fully. Janju Samir Rinpoche, Maje Banam Jujurji, Jaban Yamba Mekbadam, Kone Kondu Lawasho. Janju Samir Rinpoche, Maje Banam Jujurji, Jaban Yamba Mekbadam, Kone Kondu Lawasho. Janju Samir Rinpoche, Maje Banam Jujurji, Jaban Yamba